are joined by Nora Barrows-Friedman, an award-winning journalist, editor, and radio broadcaster. You have most certainly read her articles on the Electronic Intifada.
I experience a ton of anti-Semitism from Zionist Jews. I call you a self-hating Jew because they don't like your political opinion, and that is anti-Semitism. The implication is that the only way to love yourself as a Jew is to support settler colonialism. I have so many of these little weirdo brainwashed Zionists all up in my DMs, and they're like, how do you even celebrate Passover next year in Jerusalem? And it's like, yeah, the prayer is next year in Jerusalem. It is not set up a apartheid state in Jerusalem. It is not ethnically cleanse the land of Jerusalem. Maybe I've been doing the wrong prayer. You know what I mean? I don't know.
Zionism is a racist state ideology, and it is itself inherently anti-Semitic.
Palestine pod, Palestine pod. Sit back and relax, Palestine pod. Expand your mind.
Hello and welcome to episode 5 of the Palestine Pod, the weekly podcast where we bring you the latest headlines dealing with Palestine from all over the world, and stories, commentary, and interviews with the aim of spreading awareness about the Palestinian struggle for justice and equal rights. I'm one of your hosts, Lara E. You may know me from Instagram as @GazanGirl, and I'm joined by my co-host, Mikey B.
What's going on, y'all? Mikey Beyond on TikTok, Michael Schertzer on Instagram, and Mikey Intifada if you are writing me manifestos in my DMs.
We're so excited for this week's show. So please take a moment to like, comment, subscribe if you have not already done so on YouTube. And if you're listening on one of your favorite podcast apps, please do leave us a review. We read every single comment and we try to respond to everything. Feel free also to email us at palestinepod@gmail.com. And of course, do check out our website where we do provide all the sources for the subjects that we cover on this show. Sometimes it takes us a few days to post the sources after the episode airs, so keep checking back for updates. You can find our website at palestinepod.com. Today, we are joined by Nora Barrows-Friedman, an award-winning journalist, editor, and radio broadcaster. You have most certainly read her articles on the Electronic Intifada, where she has long been a reporter, or heard her speak on issues related to the struggle for justice and equality in Palestine on the Electronic Intifada podcast. She also hosts another podcast called The Brief, dealing with issues of empire and imperialism. She is author of In Our Power, U.S. Students Organize for Justice in Palestine. She has dedicated many years to studying and reporting on student activism, the Palestinian-led boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement, including its successes and challenges, as well as reporting on the crackdown on free speech in the US and around the world. Nora, welcome to the Palestine Pod.
Thank you so much. What an honor.
We are so happy to have you.
We're so excited you're here.
I recognize you from TikTok.
Yeah, I recognize you from your prolific writing.
Oh my
career.
God, thanks.
Yeah.
That's I was telling Lara, like, that's actually like, it was the serendipitous intro to you guys was I was just scrolling along on the TikToks, and I was like, oh my God, this guy is like saying everything I wish someone had said when I was, 20 something years old.
Oh my God, I love you so much. I'm in my 30s. Thank you so much.
Oh my God, really?
That, wow.
Whatever.
You know
I think it's just the TikTok thing.
Oh, I love you so much already. I already loved you just from your writing,
Okay, great. Fantastic. Well, I won't tell you how old I am, but I am one of those Gen Xers. I'm going to be 43.
Nice.
Who discovered TikTok over the pandemic. And it's actually been like one of the greatest ways to pass the time.
Yeah, I agree.
I love it. And there's so much like Palestine content. It's kind of, I just love it.
It seems like one of the only social media apps where Palestine content is encouraged.
Yeah, it's kind of amazing. I know,
Yeah.
like the Zionists haven't been able to shut that one down yet, so we'll see.
They are working on it, though. They work diligently in my messages.
Sure. Oh God, that must be awful.
It's not great. You know what I mean?
Oh,
It's
yeah.
not great.
Oh, well, I'm so grateful for you guys for doing this and for making Palestine such a focus of what it means to be a human rights activist and believe in justice and equality. You're like a big sister. I don't know. I'm so proud of you guys. That's great.
We feel that.
Okay.
Well, I'm so happy to have you as big sister. Yeah, I mean, we're doing it because everybody else has done it before us. We're not saying anything new. I think it's just we're probably packaging it different. The content is the same thing that activists have been saying for decades. I mean,
Exactly.
it's really nothing new.
Exactly.
We are
Yeah.
keeping up with generations of oral tradition, right?
That's right.
Like,
Exactly.
the same stories that we were told, we are repeating, we're citing
Yes.
now,
Yeah.
and they've never been more relevant.
Yeah, it's phenomenal. What a time to be alive.
We're really happy that you like it. And actually we were like kind of
Yeah.
a little like, oh my God, how are people going to receive this? Because you know, like people that are
Yeah.
doing this work tend to be very, serious about it, and rightfully so.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, of course.
So it's kind of like, well, how are you going to be received when you're trying to be serious, but you're also trying to make people laugh a little bit?
Yeah. Yeah.
And will people
Yeah.
get it? You know?
Yeah, exactly. I think that's one of the greatest ways to get such serious and terrifying information across is to just like humanize the entire situation. And the most hilarious moments in my life, many of them have been with Palestinians facing the most horrendous situations, on the ground in refugee camps, under siege, under curfew, with Israeli soldiers, running around, and just the capacity to keep laughing and to have just a sparkling and dark humor. I think that's really important, because otherwise, because they can break a lot of things, but they can't break humanity.
Because the situation is so absurd, right? And
It's so fucking absurd.
is comedy, and comedy is absurdity. That's where comedy happens, when you find
Exactly.
the absurd, right?
Right. Absolutely. Yeah, I was trying to explain to my almost 5-year-old this morning what irony was, and like, because he's getting the concept of sarcasm. So like he's like, Mama, you really love cleaning the cat litter. Ha ha.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. If we can learn how to be comedians at a very young age, then I think we're on our way to goodness.
I spoke on it in maybe the first or second episode, how one of the things that I really admired about Palestinian culture is just how funny people are.
Yeah.
And like I saw a kinship with Jews, right? Because we are also funny people.
So funny. Right. Exactly. Yeah. From a lot of like the same, well of experience, generational trauma, living in absurd circumstances and being strong enough to power through it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There are people who don't want Palestinians to have joy, right? They want them to just like wallow and be sorry. And it's like, no, Palestine is beautiful. It's just dealing with a 70+ year occupation that is trying to break its will. Right. But people see the beaches of Gaza. They're like, oh, that's like Miami. You know what I mean? That's like a regular place. And it's like, they are people.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. Right. Yeah, people who are persevering and living their lives, and the will to persevere is something we can all not just learn from, but protect and uphold and support and fight people who want to break that for them. Yeah. So that's our job.
And that's what we're doing here today. So today we wanted to discuss the latest in the news dealing with the sustained attempts to silence and intimidate supporters of Palestinian rights by restricting free speech, especially by focusing on what is happening in the US. Now, this phenomenon is certainly not new, but we have seen a surge of these tactics since the call for BDS was issued by Palestinian civil society in 2005 as a means to resist Israeli apartheid, colonization, and occupation. So 16 years after the call for BDS was issued, the battle continues. Now, looking at the US, recent polls have shown that there has been a growth in support for Palestinian rights. And this can certainly be attributed to years of sustained efforts by grassroots activists, including Palestinian-Americans, anti-Zionist Jewish allies, and other allies of color, including Black activists, to raise awareness about Israel's violations of international law, which infringe upon Palestinian rights. On the other hand, there have been relentless efforts by the Israeli government and lobby to silence those who speak out for Palestinian rights across the world by creating what is often referred to as the Palestine exception to free speech, where political speech on other subjects is protected and part of freedom of speech. But if you dare to say anything to support Palestinian rights, then you may find yourself facing an array of tactics designed to silence you. And this, of course, includes false accusations of anti-Semitism and or support for terrorism, the interference with the organization of events and conferences, whether it be bureaucratic barriers to scheduling events or outright censorship where an event is about Palestinian rights or even Palestinian culture is simply canceled due to pressure by Zionist organizations. This also includes the sanctioning of Palestinian rights groups, like what happened with Students for Justice in Palestine at Loyola University Chicago and others. This even includes the firing of professors, denying them tenure, or censoring their speech in other ways. And finally, lawsuits and legal threats are brought, including criminal investigations and prosecution. And this includes being forced to litigate anti-BDS legislation, which restricts free speech. So to get started, Nora, over 30 states have passed some form of anti-BDS legislation restricting free speech, and many more have tried to pass laws but have been unsuccessful, like Montana and Washington in 2017. But even when we speak of the states that have passed some form of legislation restricting BDS, these laws have been struck down as being unconstitutional. So can you first tell us what the anti-BDS laws typically look like in the United States, and share with us what are some of the latest legal victories in the US in defending the right to engage in political speech, even when it includes boycotting or calling on a boycott of Israel?
Yeah, it's a really intense situation in terms of these measures that have been passed by, as you said, over 30 states now since 2015, 2016. There are a myriad of ways that these measures have been put on the books and are enforced. Some, like in California, where I am, it's basically just like a lip service, kind of reiterating the fact that bigotry against Jews is not okay in federally funded institutions. And there's, there are already hate speech laws on the books. So like the one in California is pretty much watered down. People haven't been affected by it that much, but it is still on the books. The one in Florida, on the other hand, really seeks to penalize and criminalize activists and students and educators who sometimes even mention Palestinian rights or engage with the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement for Palestinian rights. And there are, like threats of not only criminal prosecution, but also like heavy fines. And then we have states like Texas and Arizona and Kansas that had these laws on the books, and they actually did harm people who were trying to exercise their constitutional right to engage in political opinion and protests. And they were so they had been able then to file a civil lawsuit against the state, saying that the state was infringing on their free speech rights. And in those states, Texas, Kansas, and Arizona, the courts agreed, and they actually issued injunctions against those laws. The Israel lobby, because it is relentless, they then worked with the legislature of those states to amend the law, not just toss it out, but to amend the law to, not have it be enforced against individuals, but rather state contracted corporations or institutions with like, a certain budget and a certain amount of employees. So there still are those laws that are on the books in those states, but it can't be applied against individuals. Just recently, in the last couple months, a similar measure was defeated in Arkansas, of all places. In order to accept the advertisements in his paper, he had to sign a contract saying that he or his organization would not participate in the boycott of Israel as long as that contract was valid. And he said, that is completely absurd. Like, it's not even like they were publishing anything on Palestine or talking at all about the BDS movement, but because political speech was being enforced on him and his paper, he filed a lawsuit and he said, this is completely unconstitutional. And the courts agreed with him. and the ACLU. And so, little by little, these laws are being whittled down, which is good. They shouldn't be on the books in the first place. As you mentioned, these laws are completely unconstitutional. They target political opinions of Americans. And the right to engage in a boycott itself is also enshrined in the First Amendment. It is your right to buy or not buy products according to your own opinion. And that's what these laws are. They're meant to drive a wedge into the BDS movement, obviously, but more than that, because they're unconstitutional, the Israel lobby knows that they will not get all 50 states and the federal, legislator to pass these laws and have them stick. They know that wherever these laws are passed, they're going to be contested. But the point is to enact a chilling effect, to get people to start self-censoring, to get people to sign if a speaker is coming, and this happened in Georgia, Abby Martin, who's a great political commentator and reporter, she was going to be giving a keynote speech at a conference in Georgia at a state university. And because they have an anti-boycott measure passed in their state, they made her sign a contract in order to receive an honorarium, which is something that, it's just boilerplate. Like, you sign the contract, you agree to come to this university and do this keynote, and you're going to get an honorarium in return. But because of the BDS measure, there is a little
addendum.
Exactly. An addendum in the contract that says, while you are under this contract, you may not participate in or support the BDS movement. And so, of course, she didn't sign it, and she sued the state of Georgia. But people who are not so aware of the BDS movement or are kind of intimidated, oh my God, if I say anything about Palestine, will I be violating the state contract? I could get sued. It's really meant to do that, to instill fear, to get people to stop talking, and to normalize this Palestine exception to free speech, or this Israeli exceptionalism.
I don't know, because those southern states are really known as a bastion of progressivism.
I mean, but there are hubs of Palestine solidarity.
No, of course. I'm just talking about historically, with slavery.
Yeah, of course. Right, exactly. They're also very, pro-Jewish.
Oh, yeah. Hey, isn't it Ulysses S. Grant, I believe, banned Jews from Tennessee or something like that? How are you going to ban Jews from a place we're not going? You won't find Jews in Tennessee. For good reason.
Now you might, but yeah.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah.
Reform Jews. You're not seeing Hasids in Tennessee. Feel me?
Probably not. No. But yeah, this all, to then have these very racist, white supremacist, anti-Semitic, Christian Zionist run states saying that you can't talk about Palestine and you have to protect Israel at all costs. It's not because they're, interested in protecting Jews against anti-Semitic violence. That's not it.
That's actually one of their specialties.
Yeah, it's because they have shared values with Israel and Zionist, settler colonialism, and they have legislators who are very happy to accept Israel lobby money. Mm-hmm. And so that's how these measures get passed. Sometimes they can be watered down enough. They're getting worse and worse, like the one in Florida, for example.
So interesting that the places that have a history of Jim Crow and slavery so closely identify with Israel and their policies.
Weird, right?
Such a weird bedfellow, huh?
Yeah, it's strange. How did that happen?
Spicy.
Yeah. Why are Israel flags always flown at white supremacist rallies?
Why did we see a guy in a Camp Auschwitz t-shirt or sweatshirt rather next to the Israel flag? Why did we see that?
When they stormed the Capitol. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
We all saw the photos of Israeli flags next to literal white supremacists and Nazis. So.
Yep. Yeah.
I wanted to mention that actually, and you write this, Nora, in your article on the EI, that the decision in Arkansas was actually the first time where a federal appeals court decided on the constitutionality of anti-boycott laws. And so with this ruling, we now have not a single anti-BDS law that was held up to the scrutiny of the courts. Every single one of them has been struck down.
That's the thing. It's like they have no merit. The lobby groups that have worked with these state government bodies to pass these measures, they know that they can't hold up in court. But like I said, the point is just to waste people's time and resources and money trying to fight this, and to get people to just stop criticizing Israel. Why would they spend if they, I mean, it's like completely absurd to me. Like, if they were so secure that Israel was a morally justified place where, you know, as they said, it has the most moral army in the world, and it is a bastion of multiculturalism and like liberal values. And if
they love the gays.
They love the gays.
Right.
Exactly. It's a startup nation.
Right.
You know, if they were so secure that those things were true, why would they spend their time trying to clamp down like a whack-a-mole every time Israel is criticized over its human rights policies? Like, that's the big question. And I think that question can't be, you know, asked enough. It's like, obviously there's something going on here that Israel and its minions don't want you to see.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. If you deflect the subject away from assessing the merits, assess our actual grievances, listen to what we're actually saying and respond on those points. If you prevent that conversation from happening at all, well, then, you know, that's probably your best way out, because you have nothing to say on the merits.
Yeah.
Yeah. Speaking of weaponizing anti-Semitism to undercut legitimate activists and organizations, I experience a ton of anti-Semitism from Zionist Jews. I don't know about you, Nora, but
all the time.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Because I'm sure they call you a self-hating Jew. They try and claim that you're not actually Jewish.
Right.
They will basically just like gatekeep Judaism and delegitimize your identity because they don't like your political opinion. And that is anti-Semitism, right? Because what they are assuming is that all Jews are meant to support Israel. They are conflating Judaism and Zionism. Every time they say that you're a self-hating Jew, the implication is that the only way to love yourself as a Jew is to support settler colonialism. Right. I have so many
violent occupier. Yeah.
I have so many of these little weirdo brainwashed Zionists all up in my DMs and my comments and everything. And they're like, how do you even celebrate Passover? You know what I mean? Next year in Jerusalem. And it's like, yeah, the prayer is next year in Jerusalem. It is not set up a apartheid state in Jerusalem. It is not ethnically cleansed the land of Jerusalem. Maybe I've been doing the wrong prayer. You know what I mean? I don't know.
Zionism, not just to me and to you, but to scholars of colonialism, Zionism is a racist state ideology, and it is itself inherently anti-Semitic because of what you just laid out, like the conflation of, homogenizing all Jews around the world as loyal or should be loyal only to the settler colonial state predicated on violence and ethnic cleansing. That we are somehow, all responsible for the violence and the war crimes. Netanyahu is one of the most anti-Semitic people on the planet. He calls himself the leader of the Jewish people, right? I don't remember filling out a ballot for that guy.
I never voted for him.
Exactly. Like, when I think about what it means to be Jewish, I think about my ancestors who persevered under the most oppressive and violent circumstances in Eastern Europe. I think about the community here that I grew up in, Bay Area in California, which I'm very lucky to have grown up in an anti-Zionist Jewish household.
Wow.
And I, like, my entire life's work up until this point has been to try and deconstruct this like very, and it's a
Disconnect.
very, disconnect this like, it's a very recent conflation. I mean, only in the past 100 years
Right.
has this like drive to converge Judaism with this political ideology. Exploited Judaism. It exploited the exile of
The trauma.
Jewish people and the trauma. Exactly.
Yep.
It was, it was thought up by atheist, bourgeoisie, settler colonialists who wanted a piece of the pie and saw a way to do it.
Terrorists.
Yeah, I mean, and I, as a Jewish person, I want nothing to do with those people. I want nothing to do with that history. But as a Jewish person living in America, it is also my responsibility to work like hell, to fight like hell for justice and equality for Palestinians, and to de-link Zionism and Judaism as much as possible.
That's a mood.
All the way.
That's my entire existence.
It should be the work of every Jewish person to really, embody that never again spirit, right? Never again doesn't mean just for us. Never again means for everyone,
right?
Including the indigenous people on this continent.
Totally.
Who continue to be dispossessed and ethnically cleansed. And so it's a global, multi-generational struggle. And one day, justice in Palestine will happen. And Jewish people around the world will have to reckon with the legacy, the tarnished, just stain on history that has been Zionism.
Can you actually speak to your parents being anti-Zionist as well?
Yeah, I know. I'm kind of like a unicorn.
Although, or was it your community? Like, was it an anti-Zionist synagogue?
Yeah.
I mean, what?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, like my parents were culturally Jewish. We didn't do a lot of Jewy things. I did go to Hebrew school when I was little. In later years, we belonged to a progressive synagogue, very radical, kind of non-Zionist. Like they never talked about Israel, but they didn't also talk about Israel the way that we should have been talking about, you know what I mean? That synagogue is now run by very radical, mostly queer people who are just, really determined to start tackling Zionism, which is fantastic. But really, it was like, growing up in Berkeley in the 70s and 80s. Yeah, my parents, my mom especially, had a lot of anti-Zionist, communist friends and community. And that's where I grew up. I'm like really thankful and grateful that I didn't have to go through this moral transformation that so many of our community has had to do. And instead I could, just kind of like keep working on figuring out how to duplicate anti-Zionism in, around me. I talk with, some of my best friends who also grew up in very Zionist, pro-Israel households. They went on birthright. They even, like, some of them even worked on kibbutzes. I have friends who are Israeli, who, left as soon as they figured out what was going on and they didn't want to be a part of it, and have now, become like really active anti-Zionists. There's so much more work to do, but I think this generation, I'm in my 40s, but I think, looking at and speaking with students on college campuses, like I do almost every day for my job, the young generation of Jews now in this country and in Canada, I think so much hope there. I mean, like, now they're like 3 generations away from Zionist project, and even how like the so-called progressives in the 60s were kind of swept up. Chomsky was on a kibbutz, for example. That has really tapered off.
Even Chomsky's views have evolved. If you listen to him lately, he's like, he doesn't even identify really with Zionism, because he's always saying now, well, it depends on what do you mean by Zionism? What's your definition of Zionism? And he says the definition that he adheres to is one that would not even be accepted as Zionism by Zionists.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's really shifted. Chomsky still has a way to go. He's been really critical of the BDS movement, for example, for reasons that I still don't really understand. But, you know, that's the old guard. And now we have these like super radical, militant, woke AF students, you know, like 18, 19, 25, who are rejecting the normalization of Zionism as it connects to Judaism, who are rejecting any propaganda effort like Birthright, who are, you know, saying like, I love being Jewish and I hate Zionism and I'm going to work to help Palestinians liberate themselves. You know, like that
Give me chills.
Yeah,
Like,
I know,
seriously,
right? Like,
seriously chills.
oh, that's good. I mean, it gives me chills too. Like
Yeah.
I mean, you know, just even I was just talking with a student the other day who we talk about like cancel culture. Butler University in Indiana just shut down an event with Angela Davis. Angela Davis being, you know, she needs no introduction, scholar, abolitionist, and radical supporter of Palestinian liberation. Some Zionists on campus at Butler University complained about Angela Davis's stance on Palestine liberation and the BDS movement. And instead of shutting it down and letting the event go on, as it wasn't, I don't think she was even going to be talking about Palestine or BDS. It was basically like a forum on anti-racism and abolition. Butler University instead shut it down. And I was talking with the student organizer who, you know, was dealing with the fallout. And she was like, look, this just shows how much power students have. You know, that like what we do, what we offer, what we plan for the people on campus is threatening the status quo so much that an entire university administration feels like they have to capitulate. But we know that it is because we are strong enough to handle this, and we're going to make it 10 times better next time. And you know, they're not going to give up. They're going to keep fighting. Just even like 5-10 years ago, students would have been really intimidated by that move. They would have been like, all right, fine. Like, we're just going to go plan something else. You know, it's too much work. It's too much struggle to try and get someone like Angela Davis. We're going to go with, you know, someone else who doesn't really talk about Palestine. Students are like, no, F that. Like, we're going to redouble our efforts now. And so, yeah, that just, it's really fantastic. And not to say that students don't have their struggles. They're being put on blacklists, you know, by Zionist organizations. They're being spied on by Israel lobby groups on campus. They're being told that they're not Jewish enough because they don't support Israel, and so they can't join Hillel, for example, you know, Jewish communal group on campus. They're sticking with their principles anyway, and that's fantastic. It's phenomenal.
I think it's such an interesting moment, the line in the sand with Professor Angela Davis, because you don't even need to know what's going on in Palestine to know that being opposed to Professor Angela Davis puts you on the wrong side of history.
Absolutely.
It's sort of like a litmus test for, she's got the most name recognition of, you know, most liberation groups. And it's like, you're opposed to that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's pretty amazing. And it shows how just deranged the Israel lobby is, that they would, you know, come out on the wrong side of someone like Angela Davis and purport in the same breath to be supporters of civil rights and supporters of anti-racism. And so,
they purport to be a liberation movement, and they are
that's the most insane thing. Yeah.
Professor Angela Davis.
Yes.
They would look at Kwame Ture and be like, nah, he's an anti-Semite. You know what I mean? It's like, they don't care about facts.
No.
And furthermore, one more thing about like these generation of younger Jews, I think that we're seeing like a real resurgence of Jewish communism, which was sort of stamped out by McCarthy era policies, etc. Everybody became very straight-laced, you know, accept the man type. And so now these kids are reverting to what happened basically after the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory, where Jews became very active in the union organizing labor movement, the Bund movement, as well as my ancestry is actually involved in founding the United Jewish People's Order in Canada.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. Like we have that I want that history.
Yeah.
To be more known, that the Bund, the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising,
Right.
was organized by staunch anti-Zionist communists. You know, like
100%.
that's the legacy that I want people to know about.
That is literally my ancestry.
It's
And
fantastic.
that's what I've always embraced as my people, right?
Yeah.
I don't
Right.
view Zionists as my people.
Yeah.
Zionists are like a weird offshoot of Judaism that have created this settler colonialist state and tried to conflate the two.
Yeah. It has exploited Judaism, used it and tarnished it.
They're still talking about the Holocaust in 2021. And it's like, you have 50,000 plus Holocaust survivors living in poverty in Israel. You all do not care. You all abused a Holocaust survivor, Hetty Epstein, who entered your borders.
Yeah.
I don't even want to say what they did to her. You know what I mean?
No, it's really true. No, again, they use that as a battering ram to silence people, to enact more injustice on Palestinians. It disgusts me to no end. And, you know, I want to delink Zionism and Judaism so bad and link it with racist, settler, colonial, white supremacist groups instead. That's where it
Zionism.
is. That's
link
link Zionism with that to because that's where it is originally linked. Zionism has nothing to do with Judaism. I mean, most of the Zionists in the US and Canada are Christian Zionists, right? Like John Hagee and these like crazy evangelicals who say they love Israel. And they, you know, John Hagee has a gymnasium, I think, in the Ariel settlement in the occupied West Bank named after him.
Yeah.
Because he has given so much. Yeah.
I wish he'd get tried at the Hagee.
Yeah. One day.
Good one.
One day he will. Yeah. I mean, John Hagee loves Israel because he wants all the Jews to move there. He loves the Zionist project. The Zionist project is like, hey, all Jews of the world, you need to come and, you know, reclaim your land. And John Hagee and the evangelicals are like, hell yeah, get out of all these countries and go live.
Bring the rapture.
Yeah, exactly. So that the Messiah can come back. And all of us will be doomed to hellfire, I think, for all of eternity. I think that's the story they tell. But like the Christian Zionists are inherently anti-Semitic. And yet we see the Israeli government just like accepting, you know, millions of dollars into, you know, settlement construction from these Christian Zionist groups. You see Kufi, Christians United for Israel, which is John Hagee's conference that he puts on every year, raising millions and millions of dollars for the Israeli military. I mean, like that, you should look at that and say, like, what exactly is Zionism linked to? Zionism is not a liberatory project. Zionism is something pernicious. It is racist. It is a settler colonial political ideology that has exploited Judaism.
A lot of those evangelical Christians are under the false belief that they're helping Christians in Palestine. Meanwhile, Palestinian Christians are oppressed heavily.
Right, remember them?
Or they just don't care. They see them as you know, collateral damage in the greater good of bringing back the Messiah. By the way, Muslims are also waiting for the Messiah, but we don't need to try to get all the Jews in Palestine for that. I mean, you know what I mean? Like that would go against.
In fairness, you guys are better at waiting. You know what I mean?
Yeah. But like this is
Jews don't love to stand in line.
Yeah.
We don't. We don't. Yeah.
But this is the thing, right? We see Israel regularly align itself with anti-Semites. And if Zionism, if the premise that Zionism and Judaism were the same thing, if that is the premise that they're trying to sell us, well, then that would mean that supporters of Israel would love Jews, right? Simple enough. But what you're finding is that the people who support Israel, incidentally, don't like Jews very much at all. And I mean,
they never have.
They never have. And you mentioned yourself Netanyahu aligning himself with known anti-Semites,
Mhm.
including leaders of other countries like Orban, Bolsonaro,
Right.
others. I
Yeah.
mean, this is crazy. He's calling
Trump.
Trump. He called Orban, for example, a friend of Israel, and this is the
Yes.
same guy who praised Nazi collaborators,
Yeah.
right? So what are we talking about here?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that's exactly it. What Israel is an imperialist project. And all imperialist projects, like the US, like Canada, like, places in Europe, they make friends with other imperialist projects. And, they have shared values of ethnic cleansing and colonization and resource extraction, captive labor forces, like, all the things that are the hallmarks of imperialist centers of power.
Racism.
They're all there. Racism, absolutely. I mean, that is like the calling card of imperialism and capitalism.
Let's not forget that Herzl was good buddies with Cecil Rhodes. They exchanged letters like they were lovers.
I mean, Israel and apartheid South Africa had an enormous weapons contract agreement and political alliance, obviously, and that's not by mistake. That's because white settler colonial societies need other white settler colonial societies in order to maintain power. And
speaking of which, there is a South African farmer who converted to Judaism, moved to Israel, and is now occupying and settling in the West Bank.
Right. I mean, settler's gonna settler, right? Like
settle's gonna settle.
Exactly.
That's, I mean, and I just that's it. I mean, you see, people who were very upset that they couldn't be the apartheid ruling class in South Africa anymore. They immediately went to Israel.
It's like all the businesses that moved out of California. You know what I mean? They're just like, we can't pay taxes here anymore. We're moving to Texas.
Ew, equality. Ew, no. Like, I want to go somewhere where I'm still like higher than other people.
Right.
So that's that. Yeah. I mean,
they just
again,
followed the supremacist wave. They just surfed it into
exactly
wherever they end up.
Yeah.
I want to go back to something you said a little bit earlier, this notion of obsession with academia, that Zionists are targeting very heavily students and scholars. And that's really been the majority of their focus in trying to silence any sort of critique of Israel. And I want to shift the focus a little bit and talk about what some of our professors in the United States have had to deal with. One of the most recent examples was the case of Steve Salaita, who even after thousands of scholars pledged to boycott the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, it still persisted in dismissing Professor Steve Salaita from a tenured faculty position because of his personal tweets about Israel's assault on Gaza in July 2014, which of course resulted in the killing of thousands of Palestinians. He was never reinstated. There's also the story of Jewish American professor Norman Finkelstein, which we all remember from many years ago, who was denied tenure at DePaul University due to his criticism of Israeli policy. There are professors who have been forced to resign for taking positions supporting Palestinian rights. Cornel West, we talked about recently, left Harvard because they wouldn't grant him tenure. And he was very vocal that this was due to his position in supporting Palestinian rights. There have been other professors who have been simply forced to resign. There have been professors who have been investigated and forced through highly contentious procedures for their support for Palestinian rights, including Palestinian-American professors. I can think of, Professor Rashid Khalidi, Professor Joseph Massad, Professor Nadia Abul-Hajj, who were all at Columbia. These individuals were eventually granted tenure, but not without a fight. So those seeking to really silence support for Palestinian rights, they know that their focus is in bullying students and, smear campaigns and threatening professors and getting them fired. They are obsessed with targeting academia. They focus on students because they're the young generation, because they are going to create the critical mass that is going to have an eventual impact on public policy, because as their opinions change and as they diverge from the previous generations, and then they grow up and they get into different positions and public and private sector, they are going to lead to that shift. So students are number one, but also professors, because if you have professors that are promoting this idea of human rights for Palestinians. What a crazy idea, right? You know, what an
Yeah.
absurd idea that people who have lived in their homes should not be kicked out of them. They shouldn't
Right.
be bulldozed, that they shouldn't have to live under a siege that locks them in cages, you know, for absolutely no reason. If you have professors that highlight these injustices, that try to correct the history that has been covered up and, you know, erased completely and censored, you know, at every step of the way, well, then that also is going to undermine the pro-Zionist narrative. So they know that their focus is on academia, and they know that they have to do everything they can to intimidate professors and students alike.
Yeah.
And that is actually part of a coordinated effort that works in conjunction with targeting businesses, suing people,
Yeah.
as well as the informational warfare that they spend a good percentage of their budget on, right? They have stated that informational warfare is the next battlefront, and
Right.
that they have to get in front of the narrative, basically control the narrative,
Rewrite the
produce
narrative.
produce
the
a
narrative.
faulty narrative,
Right. Right.
and just spread propaganda, and like you said, play whack-a-mole and knock
Yeah.
down anybody who tries to bring up the truth.
Yeah, I mean, they have entire, you know, they call them like war rooms at Israeli institutions.
Hey, describe what a
where-
war room looks like for people.
Right. Well, in this sense, a war room it looks like an office. There
Cubicles.
are cubicles and computers and Israeli soldiers sometimes, or just Israeli researchers, you know, college students who are working in conjunction with the military and Israel's surveillance apparatus to, you know, do kind of from the mundane, like post on Facebook cool things about Israel as like little propaganda things, to the more pernicious, which is like spying on students and adding them to blacklists and threatening people. And there's actually an app, act.il. It's an app. I don't recommend you download it. A colleague of mine, Michael Buchert, who's a researcher in Montreal, he and also the vice president of Canadians for Justice and Peace in the Middle East, he runs a Twitter account called the Anti-BDS app. And it basically just posts screenshots of these like missions that this app, which is funded by the Israeli government with all of these Israeli institutions, these missions that the app sends users on to, you know, harass students, to harass university administrations, to call on people like Lana Del Rey, for example, who, at the very last minute, a couple of years ago, decided not to play for an apartheid audience in Tel Aviv. Thank you. To harass cultural figures, performers, say that like Israel is such a wonderful multicultural country, and we're, you know, we have some problems, but you know, it's all because of terrorists that hate us and hate Jews.
They're treating human rights like Pokemon Go.
Yeah, right. It's gross. This app.
So you're describing people who are paid by the Israeli government,
yes,
to post favorable things about Israel in the comment section.
Right.
Hey,
basically.
hey.
Yeah.
Oppression. Oppression. There's an app for it. You know what I mean?
Right. Basically. But
So
but
all
they're
those
like,
trolls that we interact with are literally paid civil servants of Israel.
100%. That's why I don't ever debate
mean,
them. I don't
why
ever.
else would
Round the
you
clock.
why else would you like protect and defend this like cruel apartheid racist state?
Can
Some of them
you
are getting
imagine?
paid, right?
Can you
But, yeah, yes.
imagine how pathetic you have to be to get up, not get paid, and defend
Right.
apartheid?
I mean, that it's
Right.
it's a whole other level.
I
Yeah,
super
you
don't
know, you
respect
look- yeah.
anybody that's not getting paid.
Right.
You know what I mean? If you're not getting paid, don't even talk to me.
Right.
I mean, this app has also tried to influence local politics. Like they go after local city councils that are thinking about doing, you know, a BDS resolution, you know, that the city of whatever won't, you know, do contracts with businesses that support the settlements, or, you know, something like very kind of mundane like that. Or in the past year, they've been sending their users on missions to flood the California Department of Education with messages saying that they object to the ethnic studies model curriculum that the state had passed a law that they would adopt, which dares to mention Palestinians and dared to mention the BDS movement and define it accurately. We are now left with, because of not just these bots and trolls flooding the CDE's comment section, but also like, Zionist organizations around the state and around the country, we are now left with ethnic studies model curriculum in this state that is completely, all mention of Palestine has been erased. All mention of the BDS movement has been erased. And Jewish studies was not just incorporated into the ethnic studies model curriculum, but was put into Asian American studies, further trying to like indigenize Jews
Right.
to the land of Israel.
Well, except for when
So,
they play in the Euro Cup, because then they want to be European, right? So sometimes they're
I know,
European,
totally.
sometimes they're
What the
indigenous.
hell is-
They
or
won Eurovision.
right?
Yeah.
Eurovision, yeah.
Eurovision, right?
Exactly, right. Yeah, it's just kind of like a matter of convenience. If Israel is at all offended by anything anywhere, no one can have nice things, right? We can't have an ethnic studies model curriculum passed in the state that is anything related to the original conception by the authors, the scholars of ethnic studies that have been in this fight for 50 years.
They literally invented the field.
Exactly. All 20 of the original authors of the curriculum left in disgust. They had their names taken off the curriculum just a couple of weeks ago. Actually, we have
Because of the
omission of Palestine.
the removal of Palestine.
Yes.
Well, that's lucky because their names were going to be removed anyways. So,
well, yeah.
But what does it say about who you are and what your message is when you have to erase our entire existence? Like, we're not even allowed to exist and say where we came from, where my grandmother was born. I can't, even that, saying that is inflammatory. Saying that is like an act of aggression. Because it directly combats all of the myths upon which Zionism was built. And I think it's so interesting how pro-Israel lobby has always tried to get very creative in the ways that they use, the lawfare, in the ways that they strategize to target activists. They knew, for example, that they could not lobby the states to directly pass laws that would take away, for example, your right to boycott. So they had to do it in sort of like a backdoor way where, you put people on blacklists, you include certain, amendments or clauses in government contracts saying that you agree to never boycott Israel. So you prevent people from getting hired or gaining contracts in certain cases. And there's also the issue of the pension fund divestment. So many of the anti-boycott bills or laws require that state pension funds divest from companies that boycott Israel or have, expressed that they support the boycott movement. So it's this very strange reality where they're just trying to come up with the most creative solution ever to completely silence any critique of Israel. It's very different from what you see in Europe, for example. So France, which was also, very critical of the BDS movement and also passed laws to restrict BDS, did so very overtly. You simply could not call for BDS. And just by calling for BDS in a public forum, you were engaging in discriminatory speech. That's what the situation was in France. So that's much more direct and much more clear cut. And of course, this rule in France, this law in France was eventually struck down by the European Court of Human Rights for violating the European Convention on Human Rights, notably the provision which protects the right to free speech. But France didn't care and continued to instruct its prosecutors to investigate those who engage in calls for BDS. So, again, totally outrageous. What is this exceptionalism that is, it's constant. It's like the Zionists will always say, well, you treat Israel differently. It's like, no, we don't treat Israel differently. We are just asking that it be held accountable when it breaks the law. And
it's like anywhere else.
For a situation like the one that we have in France, it's one of the first rules of European law that European law is supreme to national law. And so France absolutely has to follow the European Convention on Human Rights, which it is signatory to, and the rulings of, the European Court on Human Rights. They were required to pay fines to those activists who they themselves had fined for engaging in calls to boycott Israeli products at the supermarket. So this is what we're dealing with here. It's like the Zionists have come up with, depending on the jurisdiction that they're in, the way that they believe that they can waste people's time the longest, and in the US, it was like, no, we can't make it that clear cut. We have to trap people.
We have to confuse people.
We have to confuse people. We have to trap people in a very complex legal process by creating very obscure laws and regulations and lists and all sorts of things. And that's exactly the point. It's to confuse people. It's to make people not even really aware of what we're talking about.
Nora, I read in one of your articles that the Israeli lobby worked with a lawyer in California to try and get the courts to apply Israeli law.
Yep.
And it's like, wow, that's pretty wild because they can't even apply Israeli law in Israel, or the settlements wouldn't be there.
That.
Okay.
That was really good. Yeah. I mean, just like the audacity. So a Palestinian-American activist was really upset by the 2018 sniper murder.
Understandably so.
By an Israeli sniper of Razan Najjar in the Gaza Strip during the Great March of Return. She's like a very young nurse, medic who was treating someone and was shot in the back. And there's evidence that it was a sniper killing. I mean, like he like saw her.
Killing. Absolutely, it was in the New York Times.
Absolutely,
nothing happened.
Exactly. Yeah, it was very clear. This activist was very upset, and she posted a picture of Razan next to a kind of like a stock photo of an Israeli soldier. And she, just to kind of like point out the dichotomy of like, here's a Palestinian trapped in the Gaza Strip who is not able to go back to her homeland because Israel and Zionism, and has been killed by a foreign occupier. Some of the foreign soldiers come from the US, where this activist was, and they get to go over there. They get given a gun, and they're able to shoot Palestinians, and they call that Jewish liberation.
The lone wolf soldier program.
Yeah, not lone wolf, but yes, lone soldier. But yeah, lone wolf, absolutely.
That was purposeful.
Yeah, that's good. Good. So she just kind of like, and this photo of the Israeli-American soldier was used by the Israeli army itself on their Facebook page to kind of, boast and brag about how cool it is to be a lone soldier.
Because they sexualize the girls in the IDF, hoping that they can attract men who will move to the country and spend their resources within the country. That's true.
Yeah, that's true.
That's a different story though, but yes.
That's a whole different podcast. But yes, so the Israeli soldier who let her image be used by the Israeli military then was really upset that she was being called out. And in no way did the activist who posted those pictures say that this woman specifically in this photo was the sniper that killed Razan. No way did she say. She even clarified it and said, like, I'm not saying that this is the person who did this. Nevertheless, the soldier was really upset and claims that she, it was a very mentally stressed her out. So she
must have been tough for her.
Yeah, so sad living in Israel. So she, instead of having some moral transformation where she was like, maybe what I'm doing is not a good thing, and maybe I've been wrong about this. Instead, she decided to double down on her settler colonialism and sue the Palestinian-American activist for defamation. Now in California, where the activist lives, there's only a 1-year statute of limitations for defamation suits. In Israel, it's something like 7 years. So
because they hold a grudge.
They sure do. So the Israeli soldier got Shirat Hadin, which is an Israeli lawfare organization linked to the Mossad, Israel's secret spying agency.
Explain lawfare for people who don't understand.
Lawfare is using the law to harass and bully people. So
it's warfare, but with the law.
Exactly.
Waste people's time, waste people's resources.
Exactly. Completely.
People physically.
Exactly.
Let me take a moment and shout out my good friend Kim at Food Vendors, who's dealing with this exact situation right now. They cut out all of her third-party vendors. They tried to get everybody to boycott her, and they are dragging her through numerous legal battles. So
yeah, this is lawfare in action.
Yes.
Right. So Shirat Hadin is an explicit lawfare organization. They've sued people around the world for doing BDS. So this Israeli soldier enlists Sharat Hadin to represent her for this defamation suit. Sharat Hadin then links up with a California-based attorney.
Wisner.
Right, exactly, in Southern California. And together they try and make the California court apply Israeli defamation law in this suit. And the California court was like,
fuck?
We're not going to do that.
Remember when all those states passed the anti-Sharia laws?
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's different. It's Muslims, and we all know they're trying to bring it
unrelated.
to America.
Completely
I would be willing
right.
to bet that not a single Muslim has ever argued that some sort of Islamic law should apply in America. But, you know, here we are with several states who have already
Right.
passed anti-Sharia
Right.
legislation.
Right.
Meanwhile,
Yeah.
Zionists and their, supporters are arguing for the enforcement of Israeli law
Yeah.
in the US. And why is that? Because Israeli law on defamation actually is very strict and even has criminal consequences. They want her to be locked
a year
up.
in jail. Yeah,
Yes.
exactly. Right. Yeah, it's incredible. So yeah, just again, like the audacity.
We know that you have a system of laws and precedent that you've used for generations or whatever. It's not legitimate because you stole it from Native people, but we are going to ask you to apply ours.
Yes. Right.
From a newer settler colonial
It's absolutely amazing.
But the case was thrown away.
Case was thrown out. And not only that, but the Palestinian-American activist gets to collect damages. So the Israeli lawyers and the soldier have to pay her legal fees. It's a whole process, but
we love to see
it. What's interesting about this, I mean, there's so many things, but like Sharat Hadin, which is a very well-funded lawfare organization that exists just to bully and harass people, they were able to raise $200,000 from people to support this. Like, they were putting a lot into this case. They really thought they were going to win. I mean,
you know why? Because if they were able to create the precedent in one court in the United States that was willing to consider Israeli law, I mean, come on.
I mean, it would have been.
It would have opened the floodgates.
Exactly.
That would have
been a home run for them.
Yeah, they were really counting on this. And they lost, and that's significant. And just like a week later, another California court in Southern California threw out a total spurious lawsuit against UCLA filed by this like serial litigant, this Zionist, who tried to sue UCLA into giving up the names of students who had organized and the speakers at the National SJP conference in 2018. So, and that was, like all of these Israeli organizations were, sure that they were going to get this win as well. And they got a big fat L. Shouldn't have gone to a lawsuit because, UCLA should have just at the get-go, they should have been like, yeah, we're not doing this. But the court agreed that it would have put the students and these speakers in harm's way, because these organizations, these kinds of serial litigants, all they want to do is bully people into silence. So, I mean,
did they say what they were going to do with the information?
Oh, they did not.
Yeah.
They did not. But it was really, it was very clear that what they do with this information is harmful. We can see what happens with Canary Mission. We can see what happens when students try to get jobs. Number one Google search is that,
they're an anti-Semite.
Right. That they collaborate with terrorists sort of thing, like completely fabricated nonsense.
Are you
just to smear their reputation.
Are you on Canary Mission?
I haven't checked in a while. I don't know.
I'm not on there.
Desperate to get
I'm not on there, and I'm actually really offended.
I think you can put yourself on there. Like, I think you can.
Come on. I'm not going to write my own Wikipedia page. Come on.
I know. I'm
but
like,
it's
if
like,
I'm not on there, I'm not doing it right.
That's right. I feel like I haven't earned my stripes yet. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I was on something in the like early mid 2000s called the SHIT list, the self-hating Israel leftists, something.
Wow,
Israel,
you're an OG.
something.
I'm
an OG. It was on like
before the Canary Mission.
It was like
Respect.
It was great. Thank you. It was great. And not only was I on it, but my mother was on it too.
Wow. It's a family affair.
family
Yeah.
affair. It was a great organizing tool because I was like, oh, who's involved in like
In
blah, blah,
all
blah. And
this.
I'd look
Yeah,
up on the
let's
shit
get
list and it
together.
was like, oh,
They have no
awesome.
idea how helpful
I love
they
you.
were.
Yeah.
Thanks for doing this work.
Yeah, exactly.
An org chart?
yeah.
Oh my God.
It's just insane.
Can you guys send me the
It was just-
PDF? Yeah.
oh my God. It was great. Looked like a GeoCities page from like 1996.
Yeah,
like
for
it was
sure.
totally hilarious. But it also had people like Zippy Livni on it, like the former foreign minister. And like, I mean, it was like anyone who was not like a Kahanist, you know, like
Oh, because she's not great either. Like I was.
No, she's
She's
a
not.
worse crime
She's
suspect.
a war criminal.
You know,
She
like
can't travel
yeah,
to like multiple
exactly.
countries.
No.
She's wanted
It
by
was just that she
Interpol.
didn't do the genocide hard enough. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like whoever put this list together was like, you got to go all in, sort of thing.
Yeah.
So that, and then that got taken down sometime like 10 years ago, and then yeah, I don't know about Canary Mission now.
Or with respect to these court decisions,
Mhm.
it seems like it's fair to say that the judicial branch is the only branch of government that has not been like fully infiltrated and influenced by Zionist policy, right?
Yeah.
Because anything that goes before the floor of the House is considered by Zionist lobbies. Obama told us that, you know, the Senate, obviously the same thing. And we've got Joe Biden. We would have created Israel if it didn't exist.
Yeah, the judiciary often tends to be less susceptible to political influence and outside influence, especially in a system where, like the US, where we really rely on case law and precedent, and judges have sort of a lawmaking role in the way that they, you know, shape the evolution of the interpretation of law. So this is, you know, kind of a typical feature of common law systems, and it is, you know, a space for hope for Palestinian activists, knowing that, okay, yeah, you're going to sue me, but I'm going to get the right decision.
Right.
I'm going to get a decision
Absolutely.
that upholds the Constitution and freedom of speech.
Right.
And that doesn't paint me as an anti-Semite because I want to exist as a person, you know.
Right. Yeah.
Like-
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's this wonderful organization I encourage everyone to check out, especially if you're like a young activist or a student, or it's called Palestine Legal, palestinelegal.org. It's like a wasteland before Palestine Legal came onto the scene, you know, like there was students were holding bake sales to have events that would be shut down by Zionists, and everyone would be smeared as anti-Semitic, and they had no recourse. And now Palestine Legal is there. They are just a phenomenal group of lawyers and advocates who take this stuff very seriously and are able to remind university administrations that advocating for Palestinian rights is not an act of anti-Semitism, that it is part of free speech and political opinion and political speech and expression and all of that. And they will go to court for you. I mean, they went to court for people at UCLA. They've been at the forefront of defending students' rights to advocate for Palestinian liberation. They have like all these databases where you can look up which states have passed BDS, anti-BDS laws. It's called the right-to-boycott.org, right-to-boycott.org, part of Palestine Legal. And they have this document that has a timeline of how Israel lobby groups have
the toolkit,
exactly, of the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance's so-called definition of anti-Semitism, the IHRA definition, which is it's disgusting. It conflates Judaism and Zionism.
They turned the definition of anti-Semitism into anti-Semitism.
Yeah, it's just the mental gymnastics that it took.
Pretty good stuff.
Yeah, no,
it's crazy.
I want to just say I relied a lot on the sources that Palestine Legal put together as I was preparing for this episode. They do such phenomenal work, and I'm going to post all of the resources that I use on our website. So big shout out to them. Thank you so much for all the work that you do. You guys are amazing. I hope we can meet them soon and have them all.
Yeah. Absolutely.
That legal imbalance that existed, and to some extent still exists, because the lawfare firms have a ton more money and more resources at their disposal, that mirrors the imbalance of power that exists all over Palestine, right? Where you have soldiers in armored tanks with guns, machine guns, shields, fighting against people who are throwing rocks occasionally, right? And then, you know, it just shows the imbalance of power that has existed and does exist in every single sphere of Palestinian existence.
Let's talk about the latest development in efforts
Yeah.
to silence supporters of Palestinian rights, there has been this attempt to codify the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism. There's several points that are problematic.
Yeah.
One is accusing the Jews as a people or Israel, right? So Jews
Right.
or Israel of
Right.
inventing
they're
or
the same
exaggerating
thing.
the Holocaust. So, Jews and
Right.
Israel are going hand in hand,
Right.
accusing Jewish citizens of being more loyal to Israel.
Right.
Denying the Jewish people their right to self-determination, e.g. by claiming that the existence of the state of Israel is a racist endeavor.
Right.
I mean, by
Right.
definition, it's racist because that's literally the law in Israel, is that it's a Jewish state, even though the people within its borders are not only Jewish. So by definition, Israel is a racist state, but you're not allowed to call it that,
Right.
because that would be anti-Semitism, even though that's what Israel calls itself.
Right.
So Israel is anti-Semitic.
Right. Yes. Right. And Zionism is anti-Semitic. This whole it's so crazy, like accusing Jews of having a dual loyalty or like a loyalty to Israel. I mean, this is what like Israel's leaders say, after there's a massacre in France a couple of years back at a synagogue. And I think it was Netanyahu who came and said like, you should go
Come
to Israel. Like
Yep.
You're not safe here. Come to Israel. And the French Jews were like, yeah, no, we're French.
Because if it's one thing about French people, it's that they identify as French.
They love so the Israeli government accuses Jews all the time.
Insinuates
that we have a dual loyalty, right?
So
they're doing anti-Semitism. They're doing an anti-Semitism. Yeah.
They also say,
so anyway,
IHRA definition, applying double standards by requiring of Israel a behavior not expected or demanded of any other democratic nation. This is really weird, because what is the test by which we're going to try to assess whether or not we are requiring these things from another democratic state? So do I, as a Palestinian activist, then have to be constantly involved in activism in all other states that define themselves as democratic and identifying every single human rights violation that exists in order to prove that I'm not an anti-Semite?
Yes.
I've literally had people be like, why aren't you talking about every single human rights atrocity that exists? Otherwise, you're an anti-Semite. And I'm like, first of all,
why aren't you boycotting China? Right? Like I've heard that one before.
And it's like,
they have human rights violations. Well, so you're admitting Israel has human rights violations. The problem with human rights.
They have no, or like if it's an ethno state, they're like, there are tons of other ethno states. Do you have a problem with them?
Well, actually, kind of.
Yeah.
Yes,
we do.
That's the point.
But also
having an anti-imperialist.
I mean, it's relevant for us, to all of us, to be involved in this particular liberation struggle first and foremost. Yes, we have allyship and we ally ourselves with any oppressed people, especially those that are resisting racism and all forms of oppression. But as Palestinians, as Americans, as Jews, we have a stake in how this turns out because it affects us personally.
Yeah.
So
it's like, why are you singling Israel out for special scrutiny? And then also like, why aren't you looking at Israel as a special exception?
Yes.
Like, which one is it? It kind of just depends on the context.
Say it again,
apparently.
Nora. Say it again.
So on that point, the last bullet point in the IHRA definition is holding Jews collectively responsible for actions of the state of Israel when Israel itself says it represents all Jews.
Right. It's complete madness, and this is why people have been saying that the IHRA definition is fraudulent and it is problematic, and it reinforces the conflation of Judaism and Zionism.
But we also have to remember the context in which the IHRA definition arose, right?
Right.
Remember that Zionists tried for years to smear student activists of Palestinian rights as anti-Semitic, and they were not successful. So this I took from the Palestine Legal Resource. They talk about how between 2008 and 2014, pro-Israel groups filed several federal complaints against 3 University of California campuses, as well as Rutgers University, and every single complaint was dismissed. And so it is then when the pro-Israel supporters looked at these results, they said, okay, well, if the Palestinian activists are not involved in the anti-Semitism by the traditional definition, we essentially have to rewrite the definition of anti-Semitism to fit Israel critique.
Right.
They move the
That's exactly it.
goalposts.
They
They move the
sure- that's
goalposts
what they do.
like they do with everything else.
Exactly.
If you've ever been in a
Exactly.
conversation with Zionists, you start
Yep.
out talking about one thing, and by the end, you're like, what does Hamas have to do with this?
It always comes back to that. Absolutely. That has made it into law in certain European countries, also in Canada, certain
was
provinces.
almost
have
adopted in
it.
Ontario.
But there has been significant pushback, and here in the U.S., obviously, like the IHRA. has
Trump
been-
adopted it by executive order, but I don't really know
Sure
what that
did.
means.
Yeah,
Like, what does that
no.
mean?
Right. It means that it's in effect, and I doubt. I mean, I would bet, my my next paycheck on that Biden will not repeal that executive order. He'll do other executive orders,
Absolutely not.
but
He
he is
absolutely will not.
very content
No.
with Trump's, continuation of the support of Israeli apartheid. And there's nothing, as Biden himself said, nothing will fundamentally change under his administration, especially when it comes to Palestinians. Push this bogus definition of anti-Semitism away
Brand new
from
definition. Brand new.
exactly.
Made
Yeah,
up.
exactly. Completely. Right. Like to push this definition in order to silence and confuse people. And also like, it doesn't say anything about white, like there has been no investigation into white supremacists.
It says nothing about white supremacists.
It says
Yeah,
nothing,
hey,
Nothing about
nothing.
Who is
Exactly.
it? Who is it that's actually the biggest threat to Jews in America?
Right.
Is it Palestinians or white supremacists? Asking
Depends on
for
who
myself.
you ask.
Yeah.
Right, exactly. If you are a supporter of Israel, it's Palestinians.
Weird.
Right. But if you look at the facts and
Mhm.
statistics, it's white supremacist groups
Who literally
surprise,
have
surprise.
rallies, who have rallies in
Right.
America in 2021.
Yeah. So now there is something called the Jerusalem Declaration on Anti-Semitism, which was just dropped. New definition just dropped.
Definition. Tell us about that
Remix.
one. Remix, right? Who wrote this one?
Bow, 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 bow. DJ Apartheid.
Right.
So this one is like a little better. I mean,
Okay.
we're talking like from a level of like garbage to
Yeah.
like, just a little bit above.
Little bit
So,
better.
right. The Jerusalem Declaration was written by a few hundred scholars on anti-Semitism and Jewish studies. So again, you're like, okay, great. These people actually like know what they're talking about.
Yeah.
For like the first few points, they're pretty good. It's like, anti-Semitism is a hatred of Jews because they're Jews. Great. We have no problem with that. And also like actually like delinks Zionism and Judaism.
It says only Jews can live in Jerusalem. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just
Yeah,
kidding.
right.
That's the one. That's their private version.
Right. No, it asserts that opposition to Zionism, criticism of Zionism, criticism of Israel and Israel's settler colonial system, these are not acts of anti-Semitism. Great. Fantastic. This is
Great.
what we've been saying
Love
all
it.
along. Even support of the BDS movement is not anti-Semitic. Excellent. Like, glad
Perfect.
we're on the same level here in terms of facts. Then it kind of gets a
Weird.
little murky. So the Palestinian Boycott National Committee, the BNC, which is kind of like the umbrella coalition of many civil society groups in Palestine, came out and a few days ago and said, while this can be really positive in the fight to combat anti-Semitism, we have a couple of issues with this. One is that Palestinian perspectives are not included at all. Like, there's no Palestinians. There's not even like a mention really of like, Palestinian liberation movements. Yet it is centered really on what's happening in Israel, Palestine. What the BNC said was like, along with the declarations, I love this, they're so petty and so righteous, along with the declaration's unfortunate title and most of its guidelines, it is focused on Palestine, Israel, and Zionism, unjustifiably reinforcing attempts to couple anti-Jewish racism with the struggle for Palestinian liberation, and therefore impacting our struggle. Right? So there still is this like, even though we the definition is like, on the one hand, like decoupling Judaism and Zionism, it still is reinforcing the coupling of Judaism and Zionism by centering Israel as like the focus around which all anti-Semitism analysis should be centered.
You ever read a paper that a student submitted that actually disproves their thesis? Like
I think I've written one of those before in college.
I'm talking about my own paper. Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
okay, good. Yeah. Cool. I've been there. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Start
it's kind
out
of
with
like
a
that. Right.
very clear
Banger.
point,
Banger
and
point. Yeah.
by page 5, I'm like, wow, I'm wrong. Tight.
But then you just quickly, sum up.
You just hit double space and you turn it in, baby.
No, there's nobody looking this over, actually.
Really, yeah. I mean, once again,
because again, white supremacy, by the way, and fascism is also missing from the Jerusalem Declaration.
And that's another main point.
Yeah.
Right. That they're like, hi, the main purveyors of violence against Jews are white supremacists.
Well, white supremacists have good PR because they keep, just magically not appearing in any of the relevant, discussions about their.
Just amazing.
You also, you really don't want to upset Israel's allies. You know what I mean?
No, you don't. Absolutely. Absolutely. Right. So okay. So we have this Jerusalem Declaration, and it has these inherent problems. Is it better than the IHRA? Yeah. I mean, basically anything is better than the IHRA.
Very low bar.
Right. It's the lowest bar. Bar is on the floor. But, but still it kind of like polices Palestinian speech, what they can and can't say about Israel. And so we still have a long way to go on this. Unfortunately, like it should just be a one sentence thing. Like
that's
anti-Semitism is the hatred of Jews.
Right. That's what I was going to ask, because anti-Semitism has existed for a very long time, right? Thousands of years, for as long as Jews have existed, right? So why do we need new definitions? And why was the former definition of anti-Semitism, the one that has lasted for, millennia, not a good one anymore?
Right, because Israel. Right.
Because how would you define anti-Semitism? I mean, what is the definition of anti-Semitism really? Like the real
it is the hatred of Jews.
Yeah.
Right. Because they're Jewish. The horrible stereotypes and
policies that negatively affect Jewish people, like not renting to Jewish people, discriminating against Jewish people.
This is like
those are real examples of anti-Semitism.
Right.
Saying free Palestine on the internet is actually not anti-Semitism.
Right. But, those who want to protect Israel from any and all criticism would beg to differ.
Yeah, but I think it's interesting too to recall that the call for BDS itself expressly condemns all forms of racism and discrimination, including expressly anti-Semitism, which is again another reason why the Zionists, when they looked around and they were like, okay, well, BDS itself, actually, it's not that problematic. All right, what are we going to do? We can't control BDS. They, speak out against anti-Semitism. Okay, let's rewrite anti-Semitism.
Right.
And it's actually so interesting. There are literal Nazis marching in the streets, and the Zionists are hyper focused on Palestinians talking about their own liberation, as if that is the main purveyor of anti-Semitism. They're completely ignoring Nazis.
Yeah.
Nazis.
It's I wish it wasn't so shocking, like I wish I wasn't so shocked every time I think about this. They're not even like cloaked anymore. Like they're in khakis and carrying torches on college campuses. Like they have Facebook groups.
Torches. Like somebody went to Home Depot.
Right.
Somebody took a truck to Home Depot, bought 400 torches, placed an order.
You got to be so conflicted as the people who sold them those torches. You know what I mean? Because you're like, it's a big order. It is, but okay, it's white supremacy. All right.
You guys having a barbecue? Like, what's going on?
It's a tiki party?
Yeah. Oh, that's great.
Why are you all dressed the same? Oh,
God.
I know. Yeah.
Also, they were screaming the Jews will not replace us, and it's like, my guy, I have no interest.
I know. I'm good.
What did you think I was going to replace you as?
What are we replacing? Right? Like
the KKK doesn't want me.
I don't understand it. I know. Yeah, we're good. Thanks. I have all these brand new definitions when we should just be focusing on the original one,
because it's still relevant.
I think
Yeah.
the issue
Yeah.
with the old definition of anti-Semitism is that it actually includes non-Jews. It includes people who
Yeah.
are mistaken for being Jewish, which can also include other Semites like Palestinians. And so it's this clear way of delineating anti-Semitism as to only apply to Jewish people when that has not been the case. Because if you assume that somebody is Jewish and you attack them and they're not Jewish, they're no less a victim of anti-Semitism.
Yeah.
I can't
It's
tell
not-
you
it's
how
not-
many times people asked me if I was Jewish when I was growing up, and I was
Yeah,
like,
of course.
no, I'm not.
Yeah.
Like, you look Jewish. I'm like,
Yeah.
yeah.
It's
We're
not like
cousins.
somebody who was
Yeah.
beaten up
We're
can be
cousins.
like, oh, I'm actually not Jewish and it's no longer anti-Semitism. You know what I
Yeah,
mean? If that person
exactly.
was Palestinian, that means that it's still anti-Semitism.
Yeah.
Yep.
So
Yeah.
despite these efforts to bully and silence supporters of Palestinian rights, do you have a sense, Nora, that BDS has been successful in achieving its goals? So we obviously have not yet
Yeah.
achieved the end of the occupation, the return
Right.
of refugees, or the end of apartheid yet, which
Right.
are the stated aims of the BDS movement. But momentum is certainly building, and there have been wins,
Yeah.
especially on the boycott and divestment front.
You know, the general consensus around the world is that Israel is a pariah state, just as the US is a pariah state, you know, and it's a matter of getting there. I think we are getting there. The boycott and divestment worlds are exceedingly popular and they're gaining momentum every year. I don't know. I'm just so like taken, my breath is taken away when I read through the actual, like the amount of victories that we've had just, you know, over 1 year.
BDS is the only thing Corona couldn't stop.
it's
Right.
amazing. Right. Exactly. I mean, yeah, the boycott movement, you know, especially in Europe, has been gaining ground. You know, there's this whole campaign to accurately label products made in illegal Israeli settlement colonies. That I think is a big win. There are councils around Spain that they've called themselves like anti-apartheid zones, and they have basically ruled that their municipalities will not do business with Israel. And then there's, you know, the student boycott movement. I mean, and divestment movement, you know, from like students petitioning their school cafeterias. I know this happened at DePaul a million years ago in Chicago, to de-shelve Sabra hummus, for example. Sabra hummus is owned by the Strauss Group. The Strauss Group used to, I think still does, like fund one of the most violent wings of the Israeli military.
It's also named after a massacre.
Oh, God, it's just deranged.
And it's trash hummus.
It's terrible. And there was like listeria in it. Like,
And I think it's an Arabic word.
It is sabra, which is a cactus.
Literally an
right?
Arabic word.
Exactly. It's absolutely ridiculous. So, you know, stuff like that, like students taking it upon themselves to organize these campaigns to boycott products. You know, there's like the church boycotts of Hewlett Packard. Hewlett Packard is a massive corporation, of course, that, you know, they make printers and stuff, but they also make biometric equipment for Israeli checkpoints in the occupied West Bank. And so there has been this massive Hewlett Packard boycott campaign that, like, you know, churches and community organizations have taken up. So there's the consumer boycott. And then there's the divestment piece of all of this, which is also mostly engineered by students who are going to their university administrations and passing resolutions in student government saying that we demand that our tuition dollars be pulled out of corporations that support the Israeli occupation of Palestine. Administrations have these like massive investment portfolios. You know, there's like hundreds and hundreds of corporations. If you're at a public university, you can go and actually get those documents. And, you know, especially here in California, I believe all but one university campus of the 9 undergraduate UCs have passed divestment resolutions. Some of them have passed it more than one time. And then all across the country, I mean, there are dozens and dozens and dozens of resolutions that have been passed by students calling on their universities to divest from Israel. These concepts are not new. They were concepts that anti-apartheid activists in South Africa used to help galvanize the international community. They're like, okay, great. You want to help us stop apartheid? Like, here's something you can do. Don't buy South African products. Get your universities to divest from South African corporations and call on your governments to sanction apartheid South Africa. And that was a tactic that helped.
On that point, there was also the recent list that was published actually by the United Nations,
Right.
which the Zionists tried for very long to suppress the publication of. And
Yeah.
it was held up, I think, for years.
Yes.
But essentially, the UN Human Rights Office issued a report on the business enterprises that are involved in settlement activity in the occupied West Bank in response to a request made by the UN Human Rights Council, which was made in 2016. And I think the list only recently got published. So basically on that list, if you look, you'll see all of the corporations. Many of them are Israeli, most of them are, but some of them are from the US and others are European, and those corporations would make excellent targets and fit under the aim and scope of the BDS movement. So everyone should look at those, and those should be targeted for BDS work.
A lot of those executives of those US-based corporations that deeply support Israel are serving as members of the board of regents. Right. So the body, the governing body that makes up the infrastructure for all college campuses across California is heavily influenced by corporate executives whose loyalty is to corporations and Israel.
Right. And the Board of Regents has said over and over again, after each campus of theirs passes a divestment resolution, we're not taking this seriously. You guys are all anti-Semitic for passing this, and we're not gonna do what you want us to do. I mean, they did the same thing during apartheid South Africa. I mean, the University of California was one of the last educational institutions in the country to divest from apartheid South Africa. So there is historical context and precedent there, and eventually they will divest. And just like they did decades ago, they'll say, oh, we've known Israel was an apartheid state all along. We were always with you. It just wasn't the right time. They'll make up excuses.
But he loved Mandela once he got out of jail.
Exactly. Right. But we'll get there. I think we'll really get there.
I just wanted to mention that on the UN list of companies involved in settlement activity, in terms of the American companies that were placed on the list, you have Airbnb, of course, Expedia Group in the US. So don't use
they list both Expedia and Booking.com and Airbnb all list properties inside settlements in the occupied West Bank.
And then also we have General Mills and Motorola as well that were US companies that were placed on this list.
If you were using Expedia, you're an idiot. You know what I mean? That has nothing to do with Israel.
2009 called and they want their decade back.
Yeah. Why don't you go use Ask Jeeves? You feel me? Like, what? How's Bing doing right now?
Exactly.
This was so much fun.
Thank you so much for coming on the Palestine Pod. We so appreciate your insight, your stories, everything that you've shared with us. It's so meaningful for me, particularly as an anti-Zionist Jew, to connect with you, somebody who I look up to as a sister.
Oh, thank you. That's so nice. Thank you.
Nora, thank you so much for all the work that you've done supporting Palestinian rights over the years and your commitment to justice and equality and speaking truth to power always.
You're a
Lara
true
and Michael. Thank you.
You are an OG.
Yeah, it's an OG.
Yeah, I'm feeling it. Like we got gray hair coming in.
I mean, I've got gray hairs too, and I think Israel. You know what I mean? I think it's what they do.
For
sure.
I swear to y'all, I had a full head of brown hair like 2 years ago.
2 weeks ago. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's like I look like Obama after his second term now.
Oh God.
You know what I mean? Yeah.
Thank you so much for all of your work, you guys.
It's the Palestine Pod. Palestine Pod. Palestine Pod. Sit back and relax and learn something. Palestine Pod. Expand your mind. Palestine Pod.